Okay. So well, the topic is long, but I will talk about LiDAR and satellite data for timber and carbon measurements. So, if you go first, this is the commercial of Arbonaut. So, what we do, we provide spatial information for operational decision making. Here's 4 little things as an examples of what we do. Here you can see a bubble showing some of our carbon measurements that we do globally, but mostly in tropics. The next bubble shows a little bit of vegetation management analysis for corridors, especially single tree approach, as you see. And here is a piece of forest inventory. It's quite related to this, how we will see soon. And then we also do forest information systems, mainly in Finland. So here's our footprint of forest inventory. As you see, we have already been doing a little bit of forest inventory in different countries. In Finland currently we have about 50% market share of stand level inventory. And Finnish stand level inventory is using LiDAR about 100%. In Sweden we have a good footprint, and then we have been following the Finnish industry to Uruguay, and then you see some other countries as well. The technology we use here in the inventories of timber volumes and carbon is ArboLiDAR. If you put it in short terms, what ArboLiDAR does, it takes remote sensing data, it takes field measurements, and lays a grid over the target area, calculates independent variables from the satellite, from the remote sensing data, makes a model to predict, takes the dependent variables from the plot data and then models the rest to cover 100% coverage of that information. We'll see that in a little more detail. So here's some examples of remote sensing data we use. This one shows some LiDAR. Sorry. This shows some LiDAR data. As you can see, there's ground terrain is looked in different color. The vegetation shows on different color, and then there may be some infrastructure. Like here, you can see some power lines. Here, the interesting thing in LiDAR data is the vegetation returns and also their height distribution above the ground level. Then you see a little bit of spectral data. This is from airborne sensor, but the satellite data looks quite similar. They have their own features and benefits, and in each project you have to decide which one you want to use. Here's a combination of them both. 2 where we have turned the colors into a 3D model, combining LiDAR and spectral data. So here is the basic modeling of ArboLiDAR. You can take the spectral data, you take the LiDAR data, and here's the field measurements. Sorry. Field measurements. This happens often quite traditionally, but we have to still measure the location of the field measurements with very high precision to be able to turn it into a model. And then we make plenty of predictors from these data sets, and here you get the dependent variables. And out comes the timber volume, biomass, etc. I mentioned a few of the model types that are used commonly today. The sparse Bayesian regression, K most similar neighbors, K nearest neighbors. These are the non-parametric models that are in fashion at the moment. They each provide their own benefits or strengths and weaknesses when you go to the modeling. Overall, if the correlation is good between the predictors and the dependent variables, then many models can work. Then the mixed effects modeling and other parametric models are used as well. And when we go to ArboLiDAR, it automatically spits out a bootstrap or leave one out method report on the plot dataset, telling like automatic quality reporting of the goodness of the model used. This is today a standard feature, for example, in Finnish timber inventories. When we do the stand level inventory, the customers always want to see, bring your statistical quality report as part of the deliverable. So that way they know how well or how accurately they know this information. So here you can see a little bit of the results of the prediction process. This picture shows a little piece of grid over a forest land. This is a 16-meter grid. So each grid cell, we have then estimated the volume, base area, diameter, height, and then on the left you can see a stand map. So here we have created automatically some forest stands, and then from the grid cells attributed the stands with the volumetrics and timber estimates. And on the bottom you see an example of the database row, how it looks then in a customer's database. And when you work on forestry issues or carbon mapping issues, oftentimes people want some usable elements or containers of the information that are homogeneous. And here you can see what foresters have traditionally used. They take aerial photography and they divide forest stands, and then each stand gets an attribute row of the timber types. Well, this is kind of time consuming to do, so we have spent some 19 years working on this topic, and this is what comes out. So here's automatic stand delineation that can be used then to contain the information. Oftentimes this actually is quite critical, that if you have good compartments that are homogeneous and that differ from each other nicely, that's a very good representation of the data and it can be handled easily. So I flicker back and forth a couple of times so you can see that the main borders are coming the same, but then the manual people do some things slightly different. For example, here we use the criteria that each stand has to be harvestable at the same time of the year. So you have winter harvest, summer harvest, and spring harvest. So the seasonal harvestability has been one main criteria in the besides the timber type. And here you can see actually some of the seasonal harvestability layer. It's a filtered transportation classification. So the red means it's difficult to transport in certain season, and blue means it's easy. Then the areas that we have covered are the peatlands, which are the most difficult to handle seasonally. Okay. Red projects. Here, when you go to carbon mapping, it's what is important is to see the change. And I couldn't help myself. I took this set of photos that show how a tree grows on LiDAR. So here's year 1, year 2, and then you can predict year 3 and 4. So I just give one example of a carbon mapping program that we have done in Nepal. So this project was done in Terra Arc Landscape, and you can here we mixed wall-to-wall footprint from satellite data to a sample of 2 to 3% of the land base with LiDAR, and then a sample of field plots inside the LiDAR data. So we used a two-phase sampling to get accurate results. The problem with the field plots and satellite combination is that in tropical forest, to make a reasonable field plot that can support a satellite pixel, you have to make a huge plot measurement, and it gets very costly. But with LiDAR, it has so much more accurate prediction capability of the carbon. So what you can do, you can just sample on LiDAR area, and then you can use the LiDAR to create big sample plots for the satellites. And that's how it works. Then you have to look the what actually we saw from the NASA presentation by Jack today. The activity from forest type to another, that change is important. So here you can see the piece of the Terra Arc Landscape area, and you can see the deforestation in some areas shown as red. So these are the areas where there's lots of population and people need food, so they make new fields. And here's a carbon map, the forest type map of the Terra Arc Landscape. I jump over a few of them. So when we look at the forest degradation and loss of carbon, here's how the LiDAR is looking at this. So up here you can see LiDAR of a dense forest, and then this one in the lower part is a LiDAR from a degraded forest. And this measurement height measures 20 meters, and here it measures like 45 meters, so 42 meters. So you can see how the LiDAR clearly signals the carbon content. I go through. So as here we go through the process. So first you collect the Landsat-based forest type map. Then you collect the 2 to 5% of the project area with LiDAR. Put the field plots on LiDAR area. You make then the models on the LiDAR blocks and apply it to the entire satellite data set, and you have a wall-to-wall carbon map of the forest land, which looks like this. So I was thinking in the end to put a very short briefing of next things that happen in forest sensing. We get the Geiger mode or single photon LiDAR to come to the business. This allows wider area collection at the same time. And when we get wider areas collected, what it helps is we can follow the change better, because we can do more frequent collections. Then the spectral LiDAR comes. The spectral LiDAR is a LiDAR where you use 2 or more different bandwidths of laser, and you get spectral quality of the target at the same time when you collect the shape of the target. That helps especially in species identification. And then unmanned aviation brings some new tools for small area collection. So well, here this shows the idea of the Geiger mode LiDAR. So instead of one laser beam, you actually send a grid of laser beams to the ground and measure that, and then you start rotating that and swipe the area, so you get easily a huge amount of measurements compared to traditional LiDAR. And I just calculate quickly that if we wanted to collect 1/3 of Finland, we could have one aircraft running 20 days when weather permits, and we would have 1/3 of Finland covered. So this means that we could very quickly see where are the changes, where's the cutting, where's the thinnings, where's the still standing timber. Every 2, 3, 4 years we could swipe it. Here's just a little piece of spectral LiDAR. This was technology first developed in Canada and by Teledyne Optech. And here you can see how different types of tree species show up. Especially you can see different conifers. Well, unmanned aviation is changing this by providing, well, in typical airborne LiDAR, you want to have a project of 200,000 to 1 million hectares. So with unmanned aviation, you can come maybe smaller areas at a time. And this is how the result has to be delivered in the end. So I just have a couple €100 tablet that I can stick to the window of the tractor or a truck, and then you can follow the information and use it to your benefit. Questions?
Thank you, Vesa. Any questions?
You ask if this is used for power line monitoring. We have actually done analysis on 100,000 hectares of high voltage lines in the United States, which is 25% of US high voltage grid.